All right. Aram, welcome to the podcast. I want to say a huge thank you for being on today. I'm really excited to talk to you because of all the founders that I've talked to so far. I think you've definitely had the most quote unquote clout. So, a couple accomplishments here. You scaled a previous startup of yours to a value of around 500 million, which is incredibly impressive. Aram, you are on the Forbes 30 under 30 for the United States and Canada. So, in other words, you're very, very fucking cool. I want to say huge thank you for hopping on a small podcast like mine, though one day it will be huge, and I'll have you to thank for it in part. So, um, you have a startup that recently graduated from Y Combinator right now called Modelence. It has a very interesting use case, and I think it solves an incredibly interesting problem that when I started looking into this, um, there's a lot of problems that you just kind of take for granted and you kind of assume they're just kind of like the way things are. And then seeing Modelings just kind of come in and take a problem that I just kind of thought is always going to be the way and then fix it. It really kind of opens my eyes to a lot of things. So, Aram, thank you for hopping on the podcast. Please, can you tell me a little bit about your startup?
Yeah. Hi, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Um, so the idea of building Modelence, it actually starts from my previous startup, Code Signal. And this is just kind of a result of about 10 years of us building and scaling platforms and then realizing that there are those standard building blocks that you always have to use when you build applications. And I think we've been going through multiple iterations of automating things, right? So in the very beginning, when internet just came up, it was pretty basic. It was just HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and there was not much going on in web applications. And starting from there, we've been kind of going through multiple iterations of what a web application means or what a website means. Like first, we just had this like static websites, and then later we graduated into more interactive real-time applications. And today, everything's AI powered. So we've been with Model S, we've been trying to get to that next level where your business logic, product logic is fully abstracted away, and you don't have to think about infrastructure or DevOps or, how to stitch things together, but you want something that just works where you can get built-in authentication or just get a database that already works with your user system and get monitoring and get everything built into one. Because what we've realized is now things got so complex that you have to take dozens of different tools and you have to get them to work together. And every time you have to pick the tools and you have to integrate them. And that takes a lot of time, even though it has nothing to do with the product you're building.
Awesome. And my first question here is, does this scale, right? Like I build an app, it's kind of an MVP. I plug it into Modelins. It kind of fast forward me 2 months, which I really appreciate. But then a year later, can I still run on Modelins or do I kind of have to jump ship at some point?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is very like kind of it's the perfect question for this time now because there are so many app builders today. Like you just build things with AI and you get stuck at the prototype stage. So our vision with Model S has always been production first. So the end goal is always get something that you would run in production. We're not trying to get you quick prototypes or something that you would just graduate from. It's kind of the opposite. Like we're trying to see what is it that you're going to need in production and what's the easy way to get there rather than saying, hey, what's the fastest way to get to just a working app and then kind of have to graduate to fix things or change things and run on a different platform. So we've been specifically doing this all in one approach because of that, because when you kind of provide everything, batteries included, we built the integrations for you. So everything is already pre-integrated, which means it's typically going to be more reliable because it's built once and you just reuse for multiple applications instead of generating or reusing things for each application from scratch. So yeah, that's been the idea. So Scaling is actually our number one priority to make sure everything keeps scaling and is reliable because just building is not that hard. I mean, you can build things that just work, but it's much harder to build something that's actually reliable.
Amazing. And we don't go into mode talk as much on the podcast because I can literally hear founders groan when I say, "What's your moat?" But I think there's your moat right there, right? It's super sticky. And once you start with Modelence, it's really hard to guys like get rid of you. I mean, my whole thing is there and it grows with me. And as long as you offer me a good product, why would I ever want to leave in the first place, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the original incentive for us was just build something that we ourselves wanted. And our own problem, like we noticed that this is a problem closer to the end of those 10 years of us building our previous platform, right? So it's been a very long journey. The initial, I guess the first year, like the first couple of months, it was never that big of an issue because you just ship things and it just works. And that's what you really need. The actual difference comes in later down the road when now you've grown into a more mature platform and you need monitoring, you need observability, you need things to be very reliable. And that's where we realized that like we want something like this because without this, you end up spending more and more time on doing everything. And the more your platform scales, the more custom work it actually creates if you're not using a framework.
Not that I'm by any means telling you how to run your company, but as I talk to founders, I just like to brainstorm and there's a lot of things that inspire me. How cool would it be to have like a white glove service where at some point, 10 years down the road, you're a huge company, Modelence comes in and they got like consultants almost who literally like white glove service you, tell you, okay, this is how you're going to utilize us best. I don't know. Sorry, off topic.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I think a lot of platform I've seen some frameworks do this, but I think generally the concern with that, like if that's your business model, the standard question is how does that scale? Because ultimately that means you need to have a big operations team and a big consultants team that does this. I think it makes sense in isolation, but when you actually think of scaling that, our approach is automating, especially with AI, right? I think today like, we're living in a time where you can automate most things. There's still, obviously, the hard parts are still something that human developers are doing, and you really can't replace a good architect. And ultimately, maybe we'll provide something like that at a very small scale, but without making that our main business model, which it kind of becomes part of your support. My approach always has been if you provide services like this, it should just be free as part of your support and charge customers for the cloud hosting or the actual software instead of charging them for consulting. But I think that element has to be there one way or another, whether as a support or as a consultancy.
I never meant for it to be like the main part of your business. I thought it'd be like a cool add on. You seem a little bit nicer than me. I was also thinking like Salesforce model where you just like charge them a shit ton extra or else the whole thing falls apart. But it seems like you'd be willing to do it for free. You did mention like integrating with AI a lot, and this is a very interesting question that I ask a lot of people, and I get a lot of different answers. But as you know, like AI, the last 3 4 years has kind of been a rocket ship, right? How are you keeping in mind that AI is going to continue to grow, right? So the picture I like to paint is AI is the rocket ship. You're on it, you're building something with AI, but it's moving so fast that sometimes everything falls off the desk, right? So how do you keep in mind that the product you're building now also has to integrate with future AI products and future AI like technologies that you don't even know how they're going to look yet?
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of true for any startup. You kind of want to be agile and flexible enough where no matter what changes, you're quick enough to catch up with things. But actually, I think, interestingly enough, I think we've come to a point where a lot of the AI changes have happened, and there's kind of, it's a good time to build something in a place where like you more or less you know what's out there and we have LLMs, we have agents, and some things are still changing. But I actually personally think that it would kind of slow down a little bit because usually innovation and technology breakthrough doesn't happen at like kind of in a linear way, right? Typically, like you have a breakthrough which was LLMs. People didn't expect that it's going to be so good. And then once they proved what's possible, now everyone started investing more and releasing new models, and there are new companies building their own models. But I think some of that already has happened. And now we're kind of in this more stable phase where we're just building on top of it. So our approach is like always stay open and flexible. So, if everything suddenly changes again, there is a new breakthrough, we'll just rethink our approach, obviously. But we're operating with the assumption that AI is going to keep getting better, but ultimately it's not going to be at a point anytime very soon where you can just delegate everything and forget about it, because that means there's just no engineering needed, just all done. You don't need frameworks, you don't need anything, just ask AI to do things and it just does. But I think there's always going to be whether it's 10% or 1%, you're always going to need the actual like stitching together in the platform part and the infrastructure for it, because at the end of the day, if all of the software is solved, you still have the infrastructure that it runs on. And that's our focus. And we don't want to make too many assumptions about the software itself.
Makes sense. Do you think we're far away from AGI and quote unquote conscious AI?
I kind of tend to be on the more skeptical end of this. So I would say I don't really expect there to be AGI in the sense of AGI that's like just eliminates every other tool possible where you don't need anything and you don't need engineers at all. I don't think there's going to happen anytime soon, or like soon meaning maybe like next 10, 20, 30 years. So I would, again, like this probably no one knows. And I think because I also didn't believe that AI can write code 5, 10 years ago. I would think that's just total nonsense if someone told me that's possible. So again, I think it's hard to make assumptions. I think with what we're seeing now, I think people tend to maybe over exaggerate it a little more of, okay, we're done. AI replaces all developers and that's it. I think there's still a lot to do. There is a lot more, still like a lot more place to grow, because we've been seeing how great AI is, but also we've been seeing how many gaps there are and like how it can just mess things up or not think of consequences of what it's doing. So I think those things that will obviously improve, but I don't think it will be at 100% anytime relatively soon.
That makes sense. And actually, I want to bounce this off of you. My own kind of theory on where AI is going and where I think the hype is overhyped. So essentially, people are saying like, "Oh, we're going to reach AGI because of the Moore's law," right? So our technology is just going to continue to rise. And you already said that you don't necessarily agree with that. I don't either, especially because for conscientiousness or AGI or whatever you want to call it, you kind of have a yes or no question, right? You have AI is conscious or it's not. You can't kind of Moore's law your way into that, can you?
Yeah, I think exactly, right? So Moore's law is more about, you have like a certain metric, like you want to see how fast it grows. But as you said, this is more like a yes or no question. Like, can it do everything that a human can do or no? And I think the other reason why I think it's not as simple as that, because if you look at how LLMs work, they just work in a completely different way than a human brain works,
Pattern
right?
recognition.
Like,
Yep.
yeah, it's just like it's more of a like even the part where it generates tokens one by one, I think it's just completely different in how humans think. So I think we can get better results by maybe having larger models still and just using more compute power, but I don't think it's even in the same dimension as a human logic. I kind of agree more with the other theory that there would probably has to be just a completely different architecture than the transformer architecture to bring it to the next level, than just kind of pumping more infrastructure and compute into what we already have with the current LLMs.
Interesting. Different from the transformer. I have no idea what that would look like. There's people a lot smarter than me who can try to figure it out.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. I know there's been some research around kind of real world models of letting AI just see and hear and kind of just be trained in a very different way than just
Mhm.
feeding it images and text from the internet. Because if you think about it, for example, I can speak from a software engineering point of view, like what makes a good software engineer. It's your very subjective private experiences at working on different projects and companies, and that data is not even public. So even if you had a model that can really train and learn like a human from the same amount of data, you still would need to get access to get your model to work at the same companies that a developer works and go through the same meetings and the same experiences, like build products, fail and see the issues and then learn from that, which is very different from just feeding it a lot of text from the internet, right? I think that's just a totally different approach of training. So that, especially that subjective, more private type of data, even if you train the best model on all of the internet's public data, you still won't have those subjective experiences that a human goes through when they learn something necessarily.
That's a very fair point. The human experience, yes, we're still useful. I love it. I want to take a slightly different approach. Talk about the technical founder, right? So, thanks to A16Z and everything, there's a huge trend right now of investing in the technical founder. At the same time, a lot of these technical founders are building products such as yours that makes people who are less technical more able to create technical products. Do you think 5 to 10 years, maybe later, the emphasis on being a technical founder, that's not really going to be a thing. Everyone's just going to be a founder because there's just going to be so many ways to overcome the lack of code knowledge or whatever else.
That's an interesting one also, but I think there's the flip side of it too, in the sense that I think you're right. It eliminates a lot of the differences between non-technical and kind of maybe junior engineers. But at the end of the day, you're going to need engineers who run infrastructure, who run these models themselves, who build the next generation AI, who actually make these platforms work. So I think there's two levels of technical, right? One is more like deeply technical, who can basically build the engines of everything that works. And then there is kind of slight like less technical, which I think that so far has been the layer that attracted most engineers, just doing some getting into engineering, learning how to code. And it was great being a junior engineer because you could just go work at big tech, you get a very high salary. And I think that part is slowly being eliminated already because there's been, I think there's been this gap, and there's been also the question, like if there's so much fewer junior positions, then how we're actually going to get our senior engineers, like who's going to become senior engineers in 5 or 10 years, which I think it's a serious gap. But I think there's still, it's just gonna probably create this gap where like the middle doesn't really matter. If you're not crazy technical versus you're not technical at all, I think it's probably not gonna have so much difference because you can just do it with AI, and AI can already do whatever the basics are. But I think to be able to completely eliminate the difference between anyone technical and non-technical, you would have to get AGI, which again, I think it'll take a very, very long time. But in terms of creating a company, uh, I think it's more about the mindset of the reason why you said A16Z and also YC has been heavily focusing on technical founders is I think it's kind of been like, can you, as a non-technical person, can you really build and run a large platform and make sure it's reliable? And maybe I think this is going to be an open question for the next few years to see if we're going to see more cases like this. But ultimately, I think you need someone who's going to be responsible for what AI built, right? Like
Yeah.
if you bring in AI, that's like AI is probably not your co-founder, right? And you can't keep it responsible for things that go wrong. I think you'll need someone who at least somewhat understands what it's doing. But yeah, I think we already see more and more solopreneurs and entrepreneurs building things that they couldn't build before. So I think overall, technical or non-technical, it'll probably just increase the number of founders, and people will be more likely to start new companies because I think the barrier is so much lower now. You don't need that much to start a new company.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think a lot of people listening just got slapped in the face a little when you said AI can't be your co-founder.
No, I think AI can be a good co-founder, but probably not your main co-founder. I think hopefully you have a second real human who you work with, because even on an emotional level, I think you do need one.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, on an emotional level, I start thinking about like the people who become addicted to talking to ChatGPT. Have you seen those, by the way?
I guess I'm probably one of them. I tend to spend a lot of time on brainstorming ideas with ChatGPT, and it can be really good at that, just like bouncing ideas and validating your ideas. But
Yeah.
also, you probably shouldn't rely too much on it.
Well, there's some guy who tried to marry ChatGPT, so that was pretty cool. So anyway, as we're coming up on time, I do want to talk a little bit about your background because you, unlike all your other YC counterparts, did not drop out of Stanford. Yerevan State University, which I believe is in
Armenia.
Armenia. So when did you know that you wanted to move to the United States? When did you know that you wanted to become an entrepreneur? And how did being Armenian kind of lead to that? I assume you grew up in Armenia, right?
Yeah, yeah. I spent my first, I guess, 25, 26 years growing up in Armenia, and I moved to the Bay Area after that. That's when we started doing our previous startup, Code Signal, and I had to move to the Bay Area to start growing our team here. I would say, that I'm probably not a typical YC founder because of what you said. And both me and my co-founder are also a little older compared to your typical YC founder profile. Although I would say like our summer batch, we had a lot of similar kind of profiles, and there tend to be, I think, couple different archetypes of YC founders where I think probably the most common one, as you said, is like being like dropping out of Ivy League university, or doing something at Google or Meta that's like directly correlated to what you're going to build in your new startup. I think for us, for Modelence, it's just more about our previous experience building another startup, and also just the general experience of doing what we're doing. So that tends to be one of the other archetypes. So I wouldn't necessarily say like there's no single stereotype, but yeah, I think majority of our batch has maybe slightly different profile.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I really appreciated when I was stalking your company was the fact that you do have a different background. As much as it's cool to be the Stanford dropout, and as much as I respect the guts to do that, because I could never drop out of Stanford, even if I got in, the fact that you already have that experience probably feeds a lot into your confidence and your ability to succeed with Modelings. And I guess the last question I wanted to talk about here is in your previous startup experience or in this one, did you ever have a moment where you wanted to quit, and why didn't you?
That's a good question. Well, I haven't had a moment like that in Modeless yet, because I don't know if that will ever happen, but typically in those moments, it's kind of expected, right? Because you can't expect your startup journey to be just like all great and you're just so pumped and excited and everything goes well. But I think even when it gets hard, typically, like my thinking is this is actually like surviving moments like that and showing persistence. That's really what's gonna set you apart. Like that's the important part to stand out and like keep going. The one thing that actually keeps me going is knowing that persistence and like playing the long term game is always the one that's gonna win. That's actually, when you think about it, it's just all in your control. Like it's like a fully internal factor. It's only up to you to decide whether you want to keep going or not. And that actually motivates me like more than anything else, like any possible success. Because I mean, all kind of success is like it depends on external factors. It depends on the market and economy and your competitors and what's going on around it. And whether AI is going to change something, or whether OpenAI is going to release this new feature that's going to kill your startup. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about your own persistence. And if you really decided yourself that you're going to keep going, nothing's going to stop you, because you can always come up with a different product or pivot or raise more funding. I think that's like, there is no way to lose that game unless you give up on the game yourself.
How do you balance being persistent, never giving up, and knowing when to pivot at the same time?
Yeah, that is actually, I think that's probably the hardest thing to do to get right. when you build a startup, because as you said, if you're just too stubborn and you don't want to give up on your idea, it's probably gonna kill your startup at the end of the day. So I think there are different levels. You probably should be persistent on the very high levels, like the highest level of like, this is the idea, this is my overall direction, and I want to make this company work. Whether it's this product or if I need to change the product, I will, but not being so stubborn on the more specific things, because again, everything might change. But when you start doing something, I think the persistence there is just like, I'm still going to keep doing this regardless of what I'm building. So you still keep it open, you still keep it flexible, you might change it. And I don't necessarily consider pivoting, giving up in any way. It's just, you change direction and
No,
you realize you've learned something, and now you're in the next level. Like, you've learned something, you decided, okay, so this is the right thing to do now, and that's progress. But saying, hey, I don't want to just build this company, I just want to go back to my big corporate job, I think that's giving up in a startup world
that
sense.
makes sense. And I feel like it's fair to say first time founders, when they pivot, they feel like they fail. Second time founders, they pivot and they feel like they should do it again, right?
Yep.
So, Aram, we're up on time. I wanted to say thank you so much for a great conversation. I certainly learned a lot. I know that our listeners did as well. So I want to say thank you from them as well.
Thanks for having me.